You're listening to the Core Factors audio library, spoken versions of Core Factors articles and research designed to support accessibility and for listening while commuting, working, or reflecting. This piece is titled The Coaching Loop: Using EQ to Turn Feedback into Growth. The following narration reflects the original content and intent of the written article.
The Coaching Loop: Using EQ to Turn Feedback into Growth. Few workplace conversations carry as much potential or tension as feedback. Delivered well, it accelerates growth, builds trust, and strengthens engagement. Delivered poorly, it shuts people down. Despite decades of management training, most organizations still treat feedback as an event rather than a process, a moment to evaluate performance instead of a continuous dialogue for development. Feedback is evolving. As performance management shifts toward continuous coaching, the focus is moving from what was done to what can be learned. The key to that shift is emotional intelligence. Feedback requires self-awareness, empathy, and emotional regulation on both sides of the conversation. It is inherently relational. According to DDI's Global Leadership Forecast 2025, 70% of leadership effectiveness depends on a manager's ability to build trust and communicate with empathy, yet fewer than half of managers receive formal people development training. Emotional intelligence bridges that gap. The emotional dynamics of feedback. Traditional performance feedback often triggers defensiveness or disengagement because it activates threat responses. Employees hear evaluation instead of growth. For leaders, the discomfort of potential conflict can lead to vague or delayed communication. Emotional intelligence changes that dynamic by creating safety and clarity. Leaders who recognize and manage their own emotions are better equipped to manage others. They know how to separate judgment from observation and how to respond to emotion without losing focus. Feedback succeeds when it meets three emotional conditions. First, clarity. The message is specific and behavior-based, not personal. Second, empathy. The giver demonstrates understanding of the receiver's experience. Third, trust. Both parties believe the conversation is aimed at growth, not criticism. When these conditions are present, feedback becomes shared learning rather than evaluation. The tone shifts from correction to collaboration. Emotional intelligence as the coaching engine. The move from performance management to continuous coaching represents one of the most significant leadership shifts of this decade. Deloitte's Human Capital Trends. 2025 report notes that organizations emphasizing coaching cultures see 37% higher engagement and 21% higher performance. Yet most managers feel unprepared to coach effectively. Core Factors EQ Accelerator identifies the emotional competencies that underpin effective coaching across 4 quadrants. The first quadrant is self-awareness. This involves recognizing one's emotions and biases before giving feedback. Leaders who understand their stress or frustration can communicate without projecting it. The second quadrant is other awareness. This involves reading the receiver's emotional state accurately and adjusting tone accordingly. The third quadrant is self-regulation. This involves managing impulses in the moment. When emotions rise, self-regulation allows for calm, constructive dialogue. The fourth quadrant is other engagement. This involves turning awareness into action through empathy, influence, and trust building. The importance versus effectiveness gap within the EQ Accelerator helps identify where feedback breaks down. For instance, a leader may value empathy highly, but feel less effective demonstrating it during high-stakes conversations. That gap explains why feedback can feel misaligned even when intentions are good. Closing these gaps strengthens the coaching loop, a cycle of communication, reflection, and improvement grounded in trust and awareness. The what so what, now what feedback model. Feedback often fails not because people resist learning, but because they do not know how to interpret what they hear. The what so what, now what model transforms feedback into reflection before action. What? Identify the facts. What happened? What behaviors were observed? This step removes blame and centers the conversation on data. So what? Explore impact. Why does this matter to the individual, the team, or the outcome? Empathy allows both parties to see the broader significance. Now what? Translate insight into next steps. What can be tried, practiced, or adjusted going forward? This turns feedback into growth. When leaders guide employees through this process, they help shift reactions into reflection. Over time, it builds a feedback culture defined by curiosity and learning rather than defensiveness. Building feedback cultures. Through EQ, feedback is not a single skill. It is a system of behaviors shaped by culture. According to SHRM's State of the Workplace 2025, only 1 in 3 employees strongly agrees that they receive meaningful feedback. The issue is not a lack of tools, but a lack of emotional readiness. Organizations that sustain effective coaching cultures share 3 EQ-based traits. First, psychological safety. Employees feel safe to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and admit mistakes. Leaders model vulnerability by sharing their own learning moments. Second, empathetic communication. Managers approach feedback with curiosity, seeking to understand before advising. Third, follow-through. Coaching continues after the conversation, reinforcing progress and accountability. When emotional intelligence informs these practices, feedback becomes a continuous dialogue rather than a scheduled event. Teams begin to see coaching as a shared responsibility. The EQ Accelerator enables organizations to measure this evolution. Aggregate data can reveal where cultures are thriving or where emotional bottlenecks persist. For instance, widespread gaps in self-regulation scores may indicate that leaders struggle to manage stress before giving feedback. Tracking and addressing those gaps ensures the culture matures alongside capability. Turning data into development. Quantifying emotional growth allows learning teams to link feedback behaviors to outcomes. ATD's Future of Evaluating Learning and Measuring Impact report notes that fewer than 1/3 of organizations currently connect behavioral change to business results. EQ data changes that by making feedback effectiveness observable. Practitioners can apply EQ data in 3 ways. First, baseline measurement. Assess self-awareness, self-regulation, and other engagement before launching coaching initiatives. Second, progress tracking. Reassess periodically to measure whether leaders are improving their emotional tone and feedback delivery. Third, ROI linkage. Correlate EQ growth with engagement, retention, and performance metrics. These insights provide evidence that emotionally intelligent coaching drives measurable impact. The data reinforces a central truth. Leadership growth depends less on knowing more and more on managing better. The practitioner's role, designing emotionally intelligent coaching programs. For trainers, coaches, and consultants, the challenge is to embed emotional intelligence into every stage of coaching and feedback. Effective design involves 3 elements. First, skill development. Teach managers to recognize emotional cues, manage tone, and frame feedback around behaviors rather than traits. Second, practice and reinforcement. Use role-play, micro-learning, and observation to strengthen emotional agility. Third, reflection and recalibration. Apply the what, so what, now what model to make self-assessment a consistent habit. Practitioners who combine EQ assessment with applied learning build what Core Factors calls coaching confidence, the ability to deliver feedback with clarity and care even under pressure, from feedback to growth. Feedback becomes transformative when it feels safe, specific, and shared. Emotional intelligence makes that possible. Leaders who know themselves, manage their emotions, and connect with empathy create conditions where feedback fuels progress instead of fear. The next generation of leadership development depends on this shift. As organizations flatten hierarchies and emphasize collaboration, coaching replaces control as the driver of performance. Emotional intelligence turns feedback from a compliance exercise into a growth engine for individuals, teams, and culture alike. Core Factors EQ Accelerator provides the structure and metrics to sustain that shift. By measuring both the importance and effectiveness of emotional behaviors, it helps organizations close the gap between intent and impact, one conversation at a time.
This concludes the audio version of this Core Factors article. You can explore the full written version and additional resources at corefactors.com.